Hello, everybody. Welcome to CoinFund Q&A, a really exciting one today. We have with us Brendan Eich, who is the creator of JavaScript and the co-founder of the Mozilla project. These days, he's working on Brave browser and the basic attention token. Brendan, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And do you want to give a little background on what you're working on these days?
Sure. So Brave is a big project, but it looks like a browser. That's just the tip of the spear, because it turns out browsers tend to get captured by big big companies that are either directly in the advertising business or are dependent on it directly for revenue. So that's the case with all the big browser companies. Apple is probably the least conflicted, and they've been doing things like ad blocking as an option. Brave makes ad blocking and tracking protection built in and always on. And I mentioned tracking protection because that's the invisible protection. You don't see the trackers. It's my fault for inventing JavaScript. They used to be done with one-by-one images, so-called pixels. So it's not all my fault, but JavaScript made it easier to track you. Images can be used. There's lots of ways to track you, but the commercially practiced ones involve images and scripts, and you really can't see the trackers, and they're taking a lot of your data plan. There's an estimate from New York Times piece, an analysis by a friend at Facebook named Rob Leathern, that half your data plan, maybe $23 a month, you're paying for downloading trackers, programmatic scripts that fire to find ads, and finally the ads themselves. So people have been resorting to ad blockers, but they're hard to use as extensions for a lot of average users. They aren't tested as part of the browser QA, so they tend to break pages or each other or their host browser. The host browser sometimes breaks them. And the biggest ad blockers, actually, they claim they do this very cleanly, but it's a little hard to believe. They take money for letting some ads through while they say they separately judge whether an ad is acceptable and use that acceptable ads criterion to let ads through. So it looks like they're not even ad blockers. They're sort of playing both ends of the system. Brave is blocking ads unconditionally. We're not taking fees from anybody to let ads through. We talked since we launched about being more than just a blocker, because that is destructive to whatever revenue is left for the publisher or the website at the end of the pipeline. There's sort of a pie that's being carved up by all the ad tech parties that help get ads matched with ad slots or spaces for ads. And after they've all taken in slices from the pie, they give whatever's left to the publisher, and it's not that much. So we want to help publishers as a second constituency, but our first constituency is users, because they need a browser that's aligned with their interests, that will defend their data on their devices, that will block ads and trackers without condition.
So that definitely seems like the kind of one of the pressing issues of our times. But I always want to ask founders, like, so how did you like get to your product? You know, was it something like, you know, you were just personally fed up with like long browser load times, or
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
what experiences led you to this point?
Yeah, I think it's important to, if you're doing something, it's maybe someone else can do this. I don't have this gift. I can't go do some enterprise product that bores me to tears. I have to do something I care about that solves a problem that's bothering me or actually makes life better, right? It's either it's curing a rash, or it's curing cancer, or it's giving you superpowers. You know, it's Viagra. There's got to be something in it that appeals to me as a consumer, and that definitely is true with ad blocking and tracking protection. It's not just the ads. It's, like you said, the speed and the feeling that you're being tracked, because people see ads retargeting them, which gives a little bit extra conversion by nagging you or reminding you, maybe if you forgot in the best case, or possibly just, you know, tempting you against your better judgment to click on the ad. And those retargeting instances now can follow you not just around in your browser. They can go from your mobile device to your browser on your laptop. They can also, you use your credit card in a real store, and then you go home and you're seeing ads for the thing you just bought. How did that happen? The credit card has a little ad tech module that syncs your identity and some of your attributes. It shares a little data with the sort of online trackers. And Facebook identity is also synchronized this way. There are big companies that specialize in sort of putting together profiles of people right down to your address and your age and your brand loyalty. So that bothered me a lot, because once people get bothered by retargeting, it's not just this creepy feeling of being stalked. Now you have to wonder, what are they doing with my data? Like, is it making me more vulnerable? Are they using it to make money off of me without giving me a piece of the action? Doesn't seem fair. So with Brave, I not only wanted to help the publishers hurt by ad blockers after helping users with ad blocking and tracking protection, I wanted to take on the economics of the web, because doing Firefox, we had a great partnership with Google back in 2004, and they had a very clean search ads business. And it was, the idea, I think they'd not been the originator of, I think Alta Vista and others were trying it, but Google had such a great search algorithm that their placed results, as Sergey called them in 1998, in a famous conversation with an investor, their search ads, the little texty ads in the upper right, were actually really good. They were sometimes better than the organic search results. And that was back in the day before SEO, before Google had started putting its own properties and the cards and widgets in the search result page. And that was a great partnership, but it also made me realize, if they lose you on the search result page, how do they make money off you? And I think Google realized that too, and they bought DoubleClick. So they bought an ad business, which does tracking through cookies and other means, does display ads on lots and lots of websites. And that meant they could sort of pick you up again. If you didn't click on the search ad, but you were thinking about it, maybe you finally saw a display ad elsewhere and you bought the same thing, they could kind of put A and B together. They could optimize their algorithms. And they did. A fabulous business, once in a generation business Google has there. But it also is one of the two big businesses. Facebook's the other, that's kind of dominating ad tech now. It's taking both fees in the middle for running ad exchange and ad server, DoubleClick for publishers, and Facebook's equivalent on their own apps. And it's in the case of Google, it's crowding out a lot of other opportunities. I think Facebook has invited publishers to bring their content in to instant articles, and the publishers have found that it doesn't pay that well. Their sort of news gets broken down into bite-sized commodity chunks. Their brand gets kind of effaced or sort of diluted, and they can't control their relationship with their users. So this is not healthy for the web. The web is not just a set of Google properties and Facebook properties. It never will be. The web is much, much bigger, right? It's over 1 billion sites. Nobody knows how many really. And it needs to have web standards that help people make money to keep the lights on. So those standards never rose from the 90s when we did images and cookies and JavaScript to the domain of discourse that Brave is trying to address, which is payments, anonymous identity, or pseudonyms, or something other than your real name that you have to use with Facebook, and payments, right? Some way of doing anonymous small payments, micro donations, things that Ted Nelson had thought of in Project Xanadu, micro royalties. I think that this is an important area for standards to evolve to address, and Brave doesn't want to have any proprietary advantage here. We want an open set of standards for all browsers. Our advantage is in the user trusting us to have aligned our interests with our users. And the way we do that is, open source, so we're auditable. If we could do verified builds on all our operating systems, we could. I think only Debian may support that. We'd like to have revenue share for our users if they opt into any kind of advertising model. We don't want to surprise them with ads. So that, there's some misinformation about Brave that says, oh, we're going to put our own ads in. Not without your consent, and not without giving you at least as much revenue as we take. That's a pretty important brand principle, because it keeps our interests aligned with you. And if you don't like the ads, it's like Facebook's sort of personalized ads. You can turn them off. You can say, I don't like that ad, TiVo thumbs down. This is all ahead of us. We haven't built this yet because we're launching the basic attention token first. And I'll pause there.
Okay, Brendan, great. So that's you've covered like a lot of ground. So I just want to kind of bring it back a little bit and just sort of maybe summarize, right? So you're identifying a system with basically like 3 kinds of participants, right? You have publishers, you have consumers, and then you have advertisers. And this is like the well-known, advertising-based monetization model. And what you're kind of saying here is that in our current system, in our current world, in fact, like everybody's experience is degraded. It's not just like users' privacy is being eroded, but also like the efficacy of advertising for brands is being eroded. Can we zero in on that topic?
Absolutely. So that's a great point. Nobody really wins here, but there's a high take rate. The people slicing from the pie in the middle of the system, from Google on down, the middle players take a fair amount of fees out. They also, because it's such an indirect system to put an ad into an ad space on a publisher's page, there's a lot of fraud, and fraud goes in two directions. So what fraud does is it means the advertisers who are trying to drive sales for a big brand, maybe it's an agency that works for a brand, but ultimately it's the CMO, the chief marketing officer, is going to spend this much money this quarter promoting, a better toothpaste. And so they're putting ads and they're trying to match the ads to likely toothpaste buyers, people who are fed up with their old toothpaste brand. And they're using tracking to try to sort of glean who's who. But if there's fraud in the system, if there's too many middle players taking too much money out, then those ads aren't converting the way they should, and sales doesn't follow from the ad spend, and the CMO gets his budget cut, or because marketing is kind of an art, I'll put it kindly. There's something in advertising called Wanamaker's dilemma from Jude Wanamaker, who owned a chain of department stores in Philadelphia area 100 years ago. He said, "Half my ad budget is wasted. I just don't know which half." That was true when he was doing newspaper ads and catalog ads. We had a very clear idea of what the ad was next to in the sort of newspaper or catalog. He had ideas about what the advertiser was. He had a handshake and a contract with the advertiser, a direct relationship. You see big publishers do that. They sell their best spaces directly to brands, but not everybody can do it. The web's too big. There are too many websites, too many ad spaces. Even the big publishers use what's called programmatic advertising. And so with this indirect sort of programmatic ad system and the delegation through the middle players, you get waste, fraud, outright abuse. Malware is actually coming in. And this is bad for brands, it's bad for users, obviously, and it's bad for publishers because it cuts down the revenue that's left over in the pie when they pass the nearly empty pie tin to the publisher after they've all scarfed down their slices. So we're trying to fix this by cutting out the middle players. That's important. Reducing the fraud entry points. In any large system, you may have an irreducible level of fraud where humans are in the loop, or the endpoint software has to be trusted. You can try to audit it. You can try to do things we're looking at, like remote attestation. This is all, at some point you're going to have a large system if it succeeds. But we look at the Ethereum blockchain, we look at blockchains in general, we already have Bitcoin, as a way to really help bring the fraud out. And so we're excited about the possibilities with the basic attention token to clean up the system, sort of lift the clean players from the current ad ecosystem. That's the user, the advertiser, and the publisher. Lift them into a better sort of game, better game theory, simpler model, more verification through blockchain and zero knowledge proofs, and maybe remote attestation and code auditing, open source auditing, and knowing, when users do take money out, we have to actually know who they are. So that's valuable too. But we can keep that knowledge private to your device. There's an idea with Brave that's a little hard to explain, but the idea is you have authenticity with anonymity. When you're interacting with an ad that we're proposing to build, for instance, or you're making a micro donation, which you can use Bitcoin for today in Brave, the recipient of that donation doesn't know who you are. They don't even see, we don't see your top 20 sites you're donating to. That would be a fingerprint or they identify you. A lot of people would identify uniquely. That all gets hidden by zero knowledge proofs. But the publisher is a known.
Sorry, just to clarify, that gets hidden by zero knowledge proofs today in Brave. Is that true? Yes,
the donations get hidden. There are certain services like Flatter Plus, which Adblock owns, and Blendle. If you read their terms of use and their privacy policy, they require you to trust them heavily. They take your donation site list. That is super valuable. And they actually say they can use it however they want. They can become an ad tech data management platform. They could sell it or sell access to it, which is really what happens. People think, oh, they're selling my data. Well, not in bulk, not all at once, because it's seasonal and it's valuable. What usually happens in ad tech is they sell transactional access to the data, or they sell some kind of slice of the data synced to an identity. So we don't do that. We don't see your data on our servers. We don't let anybody else see it. And it's a one-way anonymity barrier. We use zero knowledge proofs. This has some interesting properties, like you can't get a refund, but it's a small donation. So, at the end of a 30-day personal uptime period, you get to decide, you get a little notice in the browser if you opt into this and fund your Bitcoin wallet. Brave has this already in the laptop version. You look in preferences, look for the payments panel, not something you see in other browsers. You can get started with Coinbase. We're working on a Stripe integration, so you don't even need to go through the hassle of buying Bitcoin, which, people who like Bitcoin love it, but a lot of people never will. So we're using Stripe for the second beta to make it easy to fund. $5, $10, it's just whatever you want to donate monthly to make up for the effect of your using Brave as an ad blocker. And some people do 20. I know Zuko of Zcash fame does $20 a month. And then we over 30 days in your browser privately compute, it's like chart beats, very simple sort of thresholded linear based on time focused on the tab. If a screensaver is running or an app's in front of Brave, it doesn't count. And that accumulates scores, which are essentially sent over zero knowledge voting protocol. They turn into votes, 10 cents per vote. There are different sessions for each site that gets votes, so there's no way to link the sessions together, to link the sites together into a fingerprint. There's no way to link through the zero knowledge proof back to your identity. Like I said, that means you can't get a refund, but that's part of the deal. And we're already paying publishers. We have over 156, last I looked, fully verified and hooked up with Bitcoin. We find others have gone through the process enough to prove they own their domain and do some elementary KYC, which we need to do if we're going to pay them. But they haven't hooked up Bitcoin, which may be a hardship for them. So we're looking at ways to have a partner help exchange to the fiat currencies most websites are used to being paid in by their ad partners and others. And this donation system's already running in Brave. We used Bitcoin because it's the most robust, and we didn't need smart contracts. But we're doing the BAT token launch on Ethereum because we do need smart contracts. We weren't willing to take risk or wait for the root stock or whatever is coming on Bitcoin. We're going while the going is good because we need to build the ecosystem further. We need to raise funds, and we're also doing this for a principled reason that I can defend. We're going to give users tokens from the start, and as well as I mentioned earlier, cutting them in on the ad revenue if they choose to take ads. So if you think about that, remonetizing the user who's been excluded from ad tech, your attention is being rated. Ads are competing with the publisher content. They're competing for your eyeballs. Your dopamine has to be synthesized by your metabolism. It's all very expensive on you to see ads. One of the reasons people get ad blockers is just to reduce that drag on their metabolism. That should be compensated. Even if we have better ads that are private, and I can talk about how that works, you still should get a piece of the revenue. And that's possible through the token. And it's hard to do any other way. You have to claw back somebody's profit. Now we block the middle players and we put the browser and the user in the middle of the advertiser and the publisher. That's more efficient. It cuts out a lot of the middle players. It frees up some revenue to share with the user. We may even start with just ads directly to the user in a private channel where we don't have to partner with the publisher. We're not going to replace publisher ad slots with our own ads. We're not going to fill ad slots without permission. We want publishers to be on board. So that may take time, but there's a model that WeChat has proven with its one-a-day promotions through a chatbot. You're seeing other small companies like Gladly try this. Various ways of putting user-specific ads in a private channel, like a new tab, or a full screen channel, a window, or a chatbot. Some people might even prefer one email a day. And this can be much lighter touch, more carefully targeted based on local data advertising. There's no surveillance, there's no tracking of you. This can be based entirely on local machine learning, studying your local data. So that's where we're going with this. But to do the token, we want to include the user in the sort of token system from the beginning. And you can't do that if you're just using Bitcoin. Somebody would have to pay for the Bitcoins you're going to give to those users. And I haven't gotten any of the wealthy Bitcoin friends I know to offer, the 2 million or so we hope to give to the users through the token launch. So we're going to make 1 billion tokens, and we're going to have a user growth pool of 100 million tokens, and we're going to give out up to 5, I think, tokens per user. And we expect the tokens will appreciate over time. We don't want people hoarding them, but we think they'll stabilize after some initial appreciation. And then the users can donate them. They can spend them to buy upsold premium products from publishers. With the right kind of anti-fraud controls, they could gift them to each other. There's a scenario I particularly like where I read the ft.com, which has turned the corner and become a digital publisher and is making money, which is awesome. But I subscribe, I pay, because that's their main business model. And they do require you to subscribe. What if I see a FT piece and I want to send it to some friends? I don't want to copy the text, it doesn't really work right. It's HTML with images and other stuff. I want to just send them a link and wrap it up with a BAT or a fraction of a BAT to pay for that on behalf of the friends I send it to, so they don't have to immediately subscribe to FT. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. It'd be good for FT if they start to like it and do subscribe, but ask them to subscribe just to read one article is too much. So we're thinking about ideas like this to make tokens useful for small gifts. And with the right fraud controls, we think this isn't going to blow the system up because fraud is a threat, as I mentioned earlier.
Brendan, so let's kind of come back to the token. So you mentioned that Brave browser today pays Bitcoin to websites. You guys are integrating Stripe, so you can even do that with US dollars without bothering to buy Bitcoin. And then you mentioned
it's more than that. I meant Stripe is for funding the user wallet. We do use Bitcoin under the hood, and I can tell you why that is. But we would for the publisher side, we would use something similar to Stripe. Might be Coinbase or Uphold or somebody to convert back to fiat to pay the publishers. But in the middle, I think Bitcoin's important for us not having custody of funds. We're not a money transmitter. This is a donation system that's incidental to the main product. And it allows the user to have custody of funds, but we can, until the user does more KYC, we can actually control the flow toward the donees, the recipients of the donations. But yeah, Bitcoin can be hidden sort of inside the system instead of being exposed to the users or the publishers.
So what I'd like to really clearly understand also with our audience, right, is so there's the Bitcoin, which is being used as a payment layer, as a very efficient kind of payment layer, and on either side, you can go directly into Bitcoin, but you can come out and you can get in or come out in fiat. But now there's also the basic attention token. What I want to really clearly understand is what is the function of the token? You're kind of mentioning that it's going to be compensating users, but what I want to understand is what is the economics of that?
Sure. So to talk about economics in straightforward terms, there's something called a negative externality. It's when you have some cost that isn't priced into the market. There's a famous piece of work for which I think Coase won the Nobel Prize in economics called Coase's theorem, tries to sort of reincorporate negative externalities into markets through price signals. We want to do that because the big negative externality of ads, whether it's the ads that jump around and bother you or cover your text, or the feeling you're being tracked, or the hit to your data plan, or page load speed, or malware threats, or fraud threats, all those things are reasons why people use ad blockers. And the adoption of ad blockers is continuing. It's linearly growing in the US. It's gone big worldwide. 600 million or more users use ad blockers, and it's not going away. So that's a negative externality, and you do not hear about that when you hear about ad tech. What a great success it is. Getting more people using programmatic advertising or trying to improve yield. In fact, yield doesn't seem to go up either. You just have a new hype cycle for the newest approach that will guarantee more yield, and then when that doesn't happen, it's on to the next hype cycle. So we want the token to help clean up the system in two ways. One is, like I mentioned, remonetize the users, give them tokens from the start. And as I say, unless someone's going to be giving us a lot of Bitcoin, we can't do that with Bitcoin. There's sort of a secondary aspect of that I'm not as concerned about, but that is if you used an existing money system, the moneyed interests have a lot of power. If you start with a token, you have a cleaner slate. We are selling 70% to investors, so there's still going to be some whales there. We hope. I'm talking to a lot of investors of various sizes who want to get in, so we're hoping there's a good mix. We've seen some tokens that didn't sell enough, and they got sold out by mostly big transactions right away. We're selling a lot. We're selling 700 million tokens, so we hope there'll be enough to go around. But it still might be that there's a lumpy distribution initially, but people won't just hoard them. They'll want to clear them at some point. They want to trade them, and that happens through the ecosystem. So think about advertising the way we've been discussing it, with the advertiser putting money into the system, and then the middle players slice pieces out of the pie and gobble them up, and maybe let bad stuff happen too. We're going to get rid of that. And then whatever's left goes to the publisher. We would like to get rid of the middle players. We would like to have, ultimately, and this is going to require some co-evolution with Ethereum and other blockchains possibly, zero knowledge, proof-based protocols in things like Ethereum state channels, so that you can have real-time flows of tokens where the user gets a share but is not identified. There's no identity leak as there is with the blockchain today, where people can track you back to your address, and they can maybe figure out your address as part of somebody's wallet business, and maybe they can even pin down more facts about you if they put other data sources together. We'd like deterministic anonymity through zero knowledge proofs. That's not available on the blockchain yet, but we're doing our own zero knowledge proof protocol in Brave. We're doing it with a centralized accounting server for now. So we're doing a hybrid system using Bitcoin. We hope to move to the token. The token, besides letting us remonetize the users and maybe have less of a moneyed interest overpowering everybody else, it gives us this unit of account, so we can actually see with the tokens what's going on with the ad revenue flow. We have currently in ad tech, you have a problem that Digiday wrote about, where I think I can give you a link to this, where there are these various middle players, and sometimes they don't they don't tell their clients, if they work for the publisher, for instance, they don't tell them what they actually got paid, and they'll pay them less, and they'll take the difference. And their contract will say, well, they can charge certain, management or technical fees, but they don't actually put bounds on them. And this is sort of like a crooked stock deal, like a bucket shop, if you know the old stock frauds that used to be run, or I've heard of various scams run this way, where people will say, I'm trying to help Airbnb employees, sell their stock before it IPOs on a secondary pre-IPO market, and I'm trying to get $10 a share. Oh, I only got $9. Sorry. Here's your $9 a share. The person doing this pockets the extra dollar, and this happens in ad tech all the time. It's a big problem. There's non-transparency, and nobody knows what the inner take rate is versus the outer take rate. They don't know what the gross spend on the left side of the system from the marketers is compared to the net that they're left with when the pie tin is passed to them. We'd like to make this very transparent and clean, and we'd like to use the token for accounting purposes. We'd like to not have it be obscured in other transactions if it were a larger cryptocurrency or token. So that's why we're doing the token. And obviously we're doing it to raise funds. This is, I think, a valid use of tokens. You've seen some successful launches, and some of those teams look really solid, and they're building out now. It's a bit speculative, but that's how these investments work, and it's in some ways replacing the early stages of venture capital. So we're doing it for fundraising reasons, but we also want, if it goes big, to share the funds. We'll share the user growth pool if we can, among other attention apps. So that is not just about Brave. It's not the Brave attention token. It's the basic attention token. We will found and endow, if we can get it approved by the IRS, a 501c6 trade association. We will try to make a trade group, not about the bat per se, but about better advertising techniques that have to do with the bat. Like I mentioned, endpoint software, browsers, messengers, games. There's an inevitable, irreducible footprint on the endpoint device of software that can't be on the blockchain, right? You're not just running some kind of decentralized app. You're actually running something that has code, native code, usually running on your system. There has to be some trust there. There have to be some rules. There have to be some zero knowledge protocols. There have to be some auditability requirements for things like open source, maybe remote attestation, as I mentioned, which is a way of proving that when I'm talking to something across a network, the code I'm dealing with is actually what I think it is. Intel has some support for this. I think Dashlane is using it. It's Intel's secure enclaves, or SGXs. So we're looking at actually endowing a membership group if the crowdfunding goes well enough. So to summarize, we're doing this for fundraising for sure. We're doing it also to monetize users without them being too crowded out by an existing cryptocurrency's moneyed interests. Mm-hmm. And we're doing it as a unit of account for a cleaner ad tech system, almost like an in-game ad system where you, instead of having all the mess of today, you can start from a cleaner slate, and you can bring in the advertisers who still want to promote goods and services from brands, and you can bring in the publishers. They're already there because we're a browser. Other browsers we hope will join us, and people browse websites.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So there's a couple of directions that we could go from here, but let me bring it back to using tokens as a fundraising mechanism. So usually, in blockchain, this has been used to fund very early stage startups. So Yep. Can you talk a little bit about the state of the project, and what does your team look like? What is your roadmap that you're looking to raise for?
Yeah. So if you go to basicattentiontoken.org, we're putting blog posts there with more information as we go. We have a white paper, and it talks about the general roadmap. We need to, I think, use Brave as the first among, as I mentioned, many attention apps that can partake of the token, and we need to prove the technology. So we're not, going to have it until it's real. We're going to actually do trials with advertisers. I can get ad agencies who already are conscious of ad blocking and worried about it. They can start looking like they're doing something constructive about it if they do trials with us. We won't charge even for the ads. We'll subsidize fraction of a bat per ad impression or something, a very small fraction, just to get the system up and running. Mm-hmm. Do trials that users opt into. Again, the user opt-in is a key principle. We're not going to surprise anybody. User opt-in also means we'll get I think selection effect toward users who are, in the best case, really worth advertising to, and as I mentioned, we'll have to be careful about fraud. We'll make sure those users don't get their money out. If they want to take the tokens out and exchange them, assuming there are exchanges, which there will be, I'm pretty sure, they have to do some heavy KYC. We have to also rate control things so that you don't have one convincing person who's really a fraud actor or whose account was compromised and is now controlled by fraudsters, getting a bunch of bats funneled to them through thousands of other people. That doesn't make sense. Our system is really for micro donations and small ad revenue shares. If you think about the money that's going into advertising today, it comes out to the gross spend in the US was supposedly 72 billion across all of digital last year, 2016. Maybe that's in the US 250 million young adults and adults, maybe some kids, but probably not. That's a lot of people, but it's maybe $288 if you do the math per person per year. It's not uniformly spread. It's not given in a fixed amount. Of course, there are people who are whales as ad viewers, and there are people who just ignore ads or use ad blockers. But that gives you an idea of the numbers. And so it's not a lot of money, and that's the gross spend. If there's a fee to Brave, it'll be less than what we pay the user. If we're partnering with a publisher, they should get the bulk of the revenue because that's how it's always worked until recently, until programmatic advertising online. It used to be that on television, you get 85% of the revenue. I think the newspapers used to get most of the revenue if they had anybody helping them get ads at all. Usually they do it themselves. In the digital age with programmatic ads, even by the studies of the industry group, the IAB, the publisher only gets 45%. Think about the App Store, right? You get 70% if you're the publisher, that is the app owner, and Apple gets 30% or Google gets 30%. 45% ain't great. So we're trying to raise in any model where we have ads that do go with publishers as partners onto the publisher's page through the browser privately. Those need to pay the publisher. But if we do these user private ads that go in a channel that's your channel, like a separate tab or a full screen window or a chatbot, then maybe the user gets 85% of the revenue. But still, it's out of almost $300 a year in the best case. So it's not going to be a huge amount of money, and the system needs to be fraud resistant. So we're going to have to control rate and flow of funds. We're going to have to do KYC for people who want to take money out. But one of the ideas that we've worked with in Brave already, besides this idea of separating your identity, which is closely held on your device and your browser, from the authenticity of it when you're donating, we've also worked on this idea that you have to only KYC where the money can be exchanged out. You can have inside the game, sort of like in an in-game model, you can have the money flow like microdonations do in Brave today, and you don't have to make the users identify themselves too heavily. You don't have to know too much about them because they're not taking the money themselves, they're sending it on. So think about the payment system as a big graph, a directed graph of money flows. And it's only where the arrows might go out of that game into the real world through exchanges that you really have fraud problems. And if you can control the rate and do the KYC only where the edges go out, then I think you have a chance at making a much lower fraud system. It won't be a fraud magnet, and it will, in fact, help people get money to publishers for the websites they use. And here I want to add, we're not just considering websites. That's where we're starting because it's easier to do domain verification. We use a challenge response protocol inspired by the one Let's Encrypt uses called ACME, the IETF standard. And that's what these publishers, 160 or actually 300 or so, have actually gone through that much of the process. The 160 or so have gone through the whole, then giving tax forms, doing some KYC, and then giving a Bitcoin address. So we want to have these payment flows be sort of controlled in a way that isn't fraud prone, and we think we can do it. And if users actually want to identify themselves more in a way that we protect with this zero knowledge shield, they can do that. Like if you're onboarding for better ads, you might even volunteer some information like your age or your favorite brand of car, things like that. That can be closely held in the browser too. And that's where I can talk about the data model we're using because it's anti-tracking. It's like turning tracking on its head, but I'll pause again.
Nice. Okay. So I think I heard that there's a fair amount of complexity around things like regulatory compliance, that makes this a fairly like aggressive roadmap. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, the thing about cryptocurrencies, this is good with Bitcoin and with Ethereum with tokens. If you have multi-signature wallets, you can avoid being an intermediary who has custody of funds, and therefore avoid being an MSB or requiring a money transmitter license. Pretty important, right? This is something Abra is doing with Bitcoin. Now, when you do this, you actually have your users have custody of funds, but it's small funds. It's not a huge amount of money. If they lose their wallet, maybe you can I'll give them a one-time replacement for that lost funds. Obviously, they should have a backup system, which we provide. We have a way for you to recover your funds if you lose you wipe your Brave user data by wiping your Windows profile. You can print out or put on a USB stick a recovery page we offer to print for you. But a lot of people will just skip that. It's one of those things you can't really get people to do until it's too late and they learn the hard way. But it's not a lot of money to lose, not a lot of money at stake. That's why we also think the sort of anonymity barrier, not allowing refunds, is important. Zero knowledge proofs are pretty amazing. You can do things. You could even potentially give the user a receipt for the zero knowledge proven donations, and they could use that later on to claim a refund if for some reason they wanted to. We haven't done that. It's complex. It's not just regulatory, but I'll say this: the regulatory environment is using analogies. This is what they do. It's appropriate with older forms of money and payment. And if you stick to the clear, custody model of that, if you stick to the IRS ruling on Bitcoin as property, you can thread the needle here. So I'm not so worried about the regulatory burden as I am just the sort of engineering challenges. We have to do auditable open source. We have to make sure these zero knowledge proofs are sound and valid. We have to get advertisers through agencies initially to do trials. And some of that's not just technical, it's, business. As I say, the advertisers are the hungriest. They always have money. Wanamaker's dilemma is always there. Oh, half my ad budget was wasted, but here's CMO. I'm the CEO of a big brand. Here's another 100 million to spend on advertising, right? Go nuts. Try something new. And so there's always a new tech cycle in the sort of the buy side of advertising. We would like to get in on that. We would like to prove that we have a more valuable system that preserves privacy but gives greater conversion. That actually gets the right promotion to the right person at the right time. There's somebody named Joe Marchese who founded a company called Truex, sold it to Fox, and I'm a fan of what he said about advertising. He had his own Truex, New York-based ad people, marketing people run ad blockers. He said, don't fight with ad blockers. Stop treating ad blockers as the enemy. Understand why people use them and try them yourself. He said advertising online is like shotgunning 10,000 sites with an ad that you hope gets in front of the right person enough to make them click on it or do something with it. And that's really a very inefficient model. Never mind the fraud and other problems. It's just you're trying to jam things into their attention, into their brain, and you're missing the target. You're putting it on sites they never even go to. So it's just not the right way to do it. What if you could find the right moment, the right place and time to promote something novel and useful to someone who's open to it? That's the ideal. And everybody in ad tech tries to do that. They say their machine learning is better and they can find the right moment in your digital journey to touch you. We share that aspiration with Joe. We think that's why we think the WeChat one promotion a day through a chatbot model is attractive. People don't need 100 ads a day jammed into pages they browse. That's just a system that evolved opportunistically, sort of by local optimizations and accidents. The whole tracking based on cookies and images and then scripts. When I did JavaScript cross-site in '96, that was also accidental. Nobody intended those things to be used for ads. Images were for your friend's cat picture you could hotlink. Cookies were for keeping your login credentials so you didn't have to log in every time you went back or restarted your browser. HTTP is stateless, so you had to do that without a cookie. But just between images and cookies, you had third-party tracking because you can embed an image. Every request on the web, whether it's to the main page or some embedded image, carries cookies back, and they can be updated from the server, and they're stored locally. So cookies now could remember, hey, this cat image was in ESPN, and we gave you a user number 1234 because we hadn't seen you. There was no cookie. And then when the cat image was embedded in New York Times, and you went there, sure enough, the cookie for the cat image server was sent, and there's user 1234 again. Now we know you've been to ESPN and then New York Times. totally accidental evolution, not intended. Like Lou Montulli, I know from Netscape, and he did the cookie in Netscape 1. He did not intend this, as far as I know. The cross-site image, I know Andreessen, he did it in 93 in Mosaic. He did not intend that to be for tracking. It was for hot linking your friends, cute cat pictures. And then JavaScript just added fuel to the fire. So I think there's a good side to advertising. I'm not against it on principle. I think there are manipulative aspects to it that go back to, what's his name, Freud's nephew, Bernays. There are things that everybody hates about advertising, but $72 billion a year in 2016 in the US on digital ads. That's not going to go away overnight, even if like they're estimating 16 billion this year. That is fraud. It's wasted on fraud. And not everyone's going to donate. Not everyone has the means to donate. People shouldn't have to give their credit card or PayPal out to 1,000 sites to support those sites. It really should be built into the browser or the web standards in an anonymous way. And that spells blockchain, right? If you're going to do unmediated small payments, the best way to do it is not through some existing intermediary like the credit card companies or others. It's to really use trust-free blockchain. And the tech may not be quite there in terms of anonymity or scale, right? The block size problem on Bitcoin. We really want micro transactions. These are going to be very small potentially. And if you think about AR and VR, I mean, there's been a lot of hype. A lot of people don't want to put a phone on their face unless they're a gamer or a sports fan, but AR is coming, and it's coming faster than we think. And it's going to be, change the way people interact with their environment in a big way. And you're going to have these problems that Second Life had, these problems that Ted Nelson and company thought about in Xanadu of micro royalties. If you remember Second Life, people sometimes as hobbies would produce amazing 3D models, beautiful texture art to skin those models, and then someone would steal it, and they would use it however they wanted. They may even try to make some money off it somehow. And there's no way to DRM this. There's no way to lock it down like Hollywood tries to do, like Cory Doctorow rightly objects to with DRM for video. Steve Jobs, bless him, killed DRM for music pretty effectively, but
it's hard to create scarcity in digital assets, right?
Yeah, so there's watermarking. Now watermarking, people say, oh, poo, it doesn't really work, or, oh, you have to identify yourself. Well, maybe, but the thing about watermarking is it allows the usual kind of copyright policing, just like it's physical antecedent. When you watermark or put a hidden mark in a painting to identify it, it didn't require everybody to live under this cloud of DRM surveillance and this little black box model of your own computers where you don't own the computer, you're just leasing it, and it kind of owns you. And there's a DRM module inside the Ring -2 hypervisor that's sort of spying on you and decrypting the video for you. And of course, people get HDMI dongles and they steal the video anyway, so it's kind of foolish. I think DRM is just a sort of rent-seeking opportunity for more middle players, but it doesn't work with AR at all. But think about what we're doing with the token, with BAT, with the attention token. In AR, there will be opportunities to see where your eyes are pointing, because in a large shared world, there's amazing server or cloud computing that's actually doing path and ray tracing to pairs of eyes among all the users. And so in principle, there's no reason why you couldn't have micro royalties like Ted Nelson envisaged. And they have to use, I think, something permissionless. They have to use something that's on a public ledger. They have to use something that doesn't identify users in a coarse way, but allows people to contribute to creative art and creative works inside that AR world or VR world. So we're designing for the long haul. I just wanted to impart that vision to you here.
Right, and so commensurate with that kind of longer term vision, how much are you guys looking to raise in your sale?
We have a cap, I think we've announced this already, of 15 million US, which depends on the value of ETH, which has been going up. And so we're not going to set the exchange ratio until very close to the launch, because we don't want to under or overshoot too much. We're going to have to look for some stability there and then set it at the last, within a couple of days in the contract. We're raising 15 million. We're doing 1 billion tokens. 100 million of them are for the user growth pool. 200 million are set aside for the BAT, the membership organization I mentioned, if we can get that off the ground, and maybe some reserve for future user growth if needed. We have 700 million for sale, and that will be as soon as we can do it. We haven't announced the date, but I think we're going to announce within days what the actual date is. Important to help investors get ready for it if they need to get some ETH that they don't have. Important not to collide with other token launches. So we're going to announce the date pretty soon.
Gotcha. So it sounds like you're floating with what we call a majority float, and then you have a 10% allocation for user acquisition or other user rewards, and then a 20% allocation for the foundation, or as you said, trust, right? Who's going to be administering that supply. So one thing that we study at CoinFund very carefully is this idea of that model, right, where these blockchain projects sell kind of a majority of the tokens up front. One of the disadvantages of that model is that this sort of precludes doing funding rounds over time. So how do you see that playing out in the context of this project? It's like, are you kind of making a statement that we're just only going to need one funding round and never fundraise again?
That's a great question we've thought about deeply, and yeah, I've looked at things like the sort of other systems that try to actually sell more or reserve more over time, and we saw Gnosis only sold what 4.8% or something. Arguably, I mean, I'm not picking them. I don't know enough about their project. It sounds cool, but they sold so little that people were complaining to me that whales took it all in a minute. We want to get to a revenue positive proof that this is a viable model. With the donations, Brave's already taking a small fee, like 5%. This is not going to sustain us. We're not going to go big just making 5% off donations. That will not keep the lights on at Brave. So we still think ads matter just from the ad spend. We also have users who've heard about what we propose to do all along, and they said, I want those private ads that you match only on device against my local data, no signals out, that you confirm through zero knowledge proofs. I want my revenue share from that. I'm willing to take that and experiment with them with you. Those users are waiting for this. And if we can get this stood up and get it to produce revenue, we will try to get to the point where we don't need to go do more crowdfunding. Whether it's venture capital or a token launch, I just don't like the idea of years and hundreds of millions of raised speculative investments required to prove something. I realize that can be necessary. Look at the space program, which was kind of a Cold War thing, but also we got to the moon, and we did it in stages. So it was expensive at each stage, and certainly the moon was expensive. They stopped doing it at Apollo 17, but there was
it's still expensive.
Yeah, there was something there that was really hard. Physics problems and engineering problems. We're doing something we think is a little more achievable with fewer rounds of funding. We're not doing rockets. It's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. It is basically a cleaner donation and ad system that is low fraud by design, that has fewer moving parts and none of these parasite problems, these sort of intermediaries who go wrong in the current system. I don't know if you've looked at the whiteops.com methbot paper. That's the URL. Our friends at Whiteops have been sort of helping publishers at first and then advertisers deal with ad fraud. They started out, and Michael Tiffany, Dan Kaminsky, they started out with advertisers saying, oh, there's no fraud problem, we don't need you. And the publishers were like, wait, I'm getting this tiny piece of pie, and part of it is because fraud is being clawed back. And they successfully helped, and they grew, and they did a study last fall on Methbot. Must have been the hackers who were watching Breaking Bad reruns. Methbot was a way not of putting malware into endpoint systems. That happens through ad exchanges too. In this case, it was taking real ads into fake publisher content with fake users in cloud browsers clicking on that. These were high cost per action video ads. And Methbot, according to Whiteops, took 3 to 5 million a day. They got paid. Now, getting paid by the advertisers requires fooling their sort of anti-fraud pixels and their extra scripts they load to sort of look around the ad and see, is this really the New York Times that I'm in? I'm a third-party indirect programmatic ad. Am I really in the New York Times? Is this really a real user? And they fooled them. These anti-fraud pixels are kind of in the matrix, right? They blue-pilled them, and the advertiser said, hey, it was the New York Times. The video ad got viewed. I'm paying. And so Methbot collected big money. And so that's what we're combating. We're trying to make a much cleaner ad system, and that's why I think we have a chance of getting to revenue. To get back to your point about crowdfunding, we're not looking to go keep asking hat in hand for more money over time.
Awesome. So Brendan, we're getting to the top of the hour, but as my last question, I'd like to ask kind of a challenge question, if you will. So
sure.
with this project, you're kind of making the statement that, you know, advertising today is really, you know, can be improved in many ways, but most of the core problem of it is that it is inefficient, right? So you're kind of saying, you know, if I just fix a lot of that inefficiency, there's a nice amount of money that I can then redistribute like more fairly to the various participants of that system. But then
That's
there's
right.
people in blockchain, right, who are kind of making the hypothesis that using blockchain technologies, you can create monetization models that actually do not involve advertising at all. And
Sure.
you know, like one example would be like maybe Steam It, right?
Yep.
I'm sure you're familiar with it. I'm sure our audience is familiar with it. And kind of the idea there is, you know, this is a social media product that can monetize through sort of like a speculative token which appreciates with the utilization of the network. And advertisers might be involved, right, as users in the system, but not explicitly. There's no explicit support for advertising on Steam It. So what do you say to that? Do you think like your model will become just like more efficient advertising will become the standard model? Or do you think there's a chance that some of these other blockchain systems could also take over or at least make it better?
So first of all, I have lots of respect for different approaches, and I'm not saying, you know, no one knows the future. We're talking about speculations here, and I have to hedge my own. But I think Steam is further out because they're not explicitly including the current funding mechanism for much of the web, which is advertising. We're being explicit about advertising, but again, it's the basic attention token. It's not the basic advertising token. So we want the option to donate in lieu of ads. So the baseline for Brave is always to block ads, and that means that if, you know, after we get through the launch and we get things to a certain point of growth, all our users donate, and head for head, they replace their lost ad revenue and then some through donations. That's great. We'll take the 5% fee on that donation flow, and we'll hope that's enough for us. I think that would be a you know, utopia, and I don't think it's actually an option. I think most people, and I mentioned some people don't have the means to donate. Some people don't want to donate; they want to take an ad. So I think it has to be a mix. And for Steam to make this, you know, sort of less hedged bet that ads cannot be explicitly included. You mentioned advertisers might be in there participating in Steam token. You know, if they're buying tokens to through an exchange to actually then pay for ad slots, they're doing advertising, whether it's formalized in the system or not. And we're formalizing it. I think there may be other approaches to succeed. We need to compete. You know, as someone who's been at this too long, I can't pick the winner. I did JavaScript early enough that it took over, and there were skeptics all along the way. And it was never the case that JavaScript was the best. It was always the case that it had this unique opportunity in 1995 to get on first. And then, this is the real point. This is something that people have to sort of swallow their pride over. The obligation comes to us as stewards of the web, if we're involved in the browser game or any kind of web standards, to make it better. And I think if that happens with Steam or with the BAT, great. We should then rally around that. There should be, you know, after some experimentation and competing tokens, we should consolidate. And the same thing I think is happening with blockchains. I mean, it's not clean yet. There's forking, but I think in 10 years, the blockchain systems will not have failed. You know, the block size problem in Bitcoin will be a thing of the past. I would hope anonymity, a la Zcash, would be engineered in as an option from the start. We'll have a better world, and it'll be achieved incrementally. It'll be achieved through these kinds of experiments, competing and then consolidating. So just want to make clear, I'm thinking we need to be more pragmatic. We need to include advertising explicitly, but I'm not saying that's the one true way and everybody else is wrong. I'm saying that's what we're trying.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I actually have one more question, because I realize, you know, you have kind of a really unique perspective, just having been in the technology world for a really long time. And this is kind of a general question. So, you know, right now there's a lot of exuberance in blockchain, right? There's a lot of people building startup companies. I imagine that this harkens back to something like, you know, the early 90s or the late 90s or something like that. And everyone is kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. Is, you know, do blockchain startups have a special status because they work with cryptocurrency, which is so new and different? or do the same thing, the same kind of technology cycles that have happened in the past many times with startup companies? Are we about to see that happen again? What do you say, Brendan?
I say the latter. I say people talk about a bubble, and it's hard to see when you're in it, but part of the, ignoring any sort of exogenous problems like credit bubbles where, easy money leads to silly speculations. Remember pets.com? I lived through the late 90s, and a bunch of us knew those companies were just future Deadpool members, and yet they were, I knew, like, limousine drivers were using their credit cards to try to invest in pets.com. I probably lost their life savings. Not a good thing. Now, there's some feeling of that around, but I think blockchain is here to stay. I think it's not just the zero trust model, because humans have been, transacting with trusted third parties since agriculture for 10,000 years at least, for good and ill, right? There are problems with, Nick Szabo's written eloquently about this. Sometimes you need third parties because of regulatory reasons. Somebody's holding a gun to your head, essentially. But I think blockchain's here to stay. And you see things like the Enterprise Ethereum Association. That's a big, serious step. That's not going to be walked back lightly. So, I'm a pragmatist, and I've survived bubbles before, and I think we'll survive this one. We have to be careful. I know people who are enthusiastic. I know Bitcoin maximalists and others, and they think that just the virtue of the system, which, in the case of Bitcoin, has amazing properties, like Satoshi was a robot from the future, but that's not enough. You have to get in front of users. You have to have users engage with a product they love for its own qualities, and they may not understand the engineering or scientific properties of Bitcoin or the blockchain. They may just want a hot product that does the right thing by them. And so build those products if you want to be successful. Don't just say, I've got amazing blockchain tech, because that doesn't guarantee that you'll get to scale, that you'll have an influence, you'll have durability.
Right. Great. That's a great view. All right, Brendan. Well, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to talk about Brave and BAT. Best of luck in your crowd sale. We'll definitely be following along, and we hope to have you again sometime.
Thanks. It was fun. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks again. Bye-bye.